Southern Germany that the French captured early in the war. It was to this area that the 32nd Division was initially assigned. The 126th Infantry became the first American troops to set foot on German soil when they relieved the French army holding the trenches there.
The company was met by French guides who led them toward the front. The system of trenches is most mystifying, to say the least. One can't tell where they lead to, nor whether they parallel the enemy line or how far away his line is. The trees and posts of the barbed wire entanglements are strange to the newcomer, and soon he feels as if he lost all bearing of his location. Captain Gonzer.
The war had long before settled into a stalemate in this sector, and the 32nd Division's orders were to hold the line while they relieved the French forces. Daily shelling and machine gunning of the trenches occurred. Raiding parties into no man's land were staged each night.
Almost every sector they sent out scouts there. So somewhere down the line, they're going to capture somebody. So they were scared, and so was we.
I went down to Petty Post 10 and got some burnt cork put on my face and started out. We were a very short way from the Hun trench. They made it pretty hot for us, but I made it back okay with a bunch. Charles Bennett, bugler.
Besides the Germans, we encountered other enemies in the trenches, namely the rats and cooties. The former were not molested much by the French, as they looked upon them as instruments of warning against the presence of poisonous gas. They were quite numerous, and some nearly attained the size of a cat. They weren't welcomed by our men and were disposed of at every opportunity. The cooties were a pest that hung on. They made life miserable, and shirt reading was a daily routine. Captain Gonzer.
Wish I could take a course of treatment for the cooties. Although I'm entirely rid of them at the present, I expect to start scratching as soon as I get back to the line. A soldier would really be lost without his little pets. Private Steve Brody.
The trenches were about 7 feet deep and had a step up for firing from, which faced the enemy. Communicating trenches zigzagged out into no man's land toward the enemy lines. These were called petty posts and were occupied during the day by a few men as observation and listening posts.
I shot at a sniper. They told me not to get my head over the pit, but I did. A bullet went by my ear, so I got up and shot at him, and then they turned a machine gun on him. I could see him by a tree, but I had to get back, and he was still shooting when I left. Charles Bennett, bugler.
A market for the sale of horse meat in this city was assured when the Board of Health announced that there was no law against selling the flesh of equines for human consumption. Kalamazoo Gazette.
Back in Kalamazoo, the draft was underway and further efforts were being made to conserve meat.
Alderman Cornelius Verberg introduced a resolution that the City Council disapprove the opening of a horse meat market. He believes it would give the Kaiser too much joy if he should hear that horse meat was being sold in Kalamazoo. Kalamazoo Gazette.
Private Joseph W. Guyton of Everett, Michigan became the first casualty of the 126th and the first American to die on German soil when he was killed by a machine gun barrage while manning Petty Post number 9. From that point on, death would be a constant companion.
A raid in our lines was made by the Germans in the early morning hours. The enemy raiding party had come over in the night and lay in waiting in the trench composing the observation post and in shell holes nearby. This advanced post was occupied by our troops in the daytime only. At 5:30 a.m., as the day relief with Lieutenant Carl A. Johnson in the lead approached its post, he was shot in the abdomen and fell. The report of the pistol shot was the signal for the enemy to open the attack. They were camouflaged with grass covering their helmets and bodies and resembled the turf as they lay in ambush along the top of the trench parapet. And as they stood up, it looked to the men in the trenches as if the whole parapet was lifted up. The enemy commenced throwing grenades at the bend in the trench and cut off 3 men who were following in single file behind Lieutenant Johnson. The men cut off were surrounded and their surrender demanded, but instead they fought with grenades and rifle fire, all the time sustaining a fusillade of enemy grenades. One big German fell from the parapet into the trench when hit by a rifle bullet. Another threw his hands in the air and fell backward from the parapet, dead. The fight put up by the 3 Yanks attacked from all sides caused confusion and excitement among the enemy raiding party, who were surprised by this unexpected show of resistance. The 3 Americans finally managed to fight their way back through the trench. A small counterattack was organized and advanced along the trench on both sides of the parapet. When they reached the place where Lieutenant Johnson fell, they found him lying on his back. Besides being shot from the stomach, he had received another shot in the forehead. All sorts of explosives, including grenades and dynamite, were attached to his body with cords in such a manner that if his body was lifted, fuses would be ignited and all blown to atoms. The lieutenant's uniform was stripped of articles of identification and his leather leggings taken, presumably as proof to secure the bonus which German soldiers receive for killing an American officer. Captain Ganser.
In the summer of 1918, the Germans had begun an offensive push which stalled 50 miles short of Paris on the Marne River. In the Battle of Château-Thierry, American and French forces had barely stopped the German advance. The Germans now planned an eastward assault on July 15th to extend their earlier gains. Allied intelligence learned of the attack and planned a counter-assault, not directed at the German front, but at the western face of the salient near Soissons, in an attempt to cut off the attacking forces. This was to be made by the French 10th Army with help from 2 other American divisions. Meanwhile, 4 other American divisions, including the 32nd, were secretly placed under French command and transported to meet the German offensive. On July 18th, the Allies attacked at both points and a pitched battle ensued. The 126th Infantry approached the front.
We rode all day without nothing to eat. We went through town after town that had been flattened, past battlefield after battlefield. There were guns, helmets, clothing, everything of all nations strung all over. Hundreds of graves with crosses and helmets on. God, war is hell. Charles Bennett, bugler.
Hardly had packs been unrolled when the Germans commenced to shell the woods. There was no cover against the shell fire, and as the shells fell and exploded among us, there was nothing to do but lie still and take the bombardment. The shelling lasted until daylight and resulted in 4 men being killed and 15 wounded. Captain Ganser.
By July 30th, the German advance had been driven back by the American 3rd and 28th Divisions to a position along the Ourcq River, where they were determined to make a stand. The 32nd Division replaced the depleted 3rd Division at the river's edge, and an attack was ordered for the next day.
We know that we will have to pay the price of victory, and whatever the cost is, we, like the people at home, are willing to pay it, and are firmly resolved to stick until the Hun has decided he's had enough and is willing to quit. Colonel Westnedge.